Greetings, church. If you're watching this video, you probably already know me, but if you don't, my name is Matt Ratliff, and I'm blessed to serve as the pastor of Haynie Chapel United Methodist Church. From wherever and whenever you join us in worship today, be welcomed in the strong name of Jesus Christ. We are smack dab in the middle of a sermon series called Because God. In it, we've been remembering and bearing witness to some of the miracles associated with Christ's earthly ministry and checking in with Paul and his letter to the Romans. We've also been taking the opportunity to ask different questions around the miracles. It's been said by many a pastor that God's how is our why, and we so often want to understand how miracles work. But if we pause in this space of asking why rather than how, we have a chance to discover that most of the why gets answered in the mystery of it all, that some things may be beyond our ability to understand, but they are not beyond our capacity for faith. This week, we join the story with Jesus and the 12 outside Sidon and Tyre, a region with a larger than average number of Gentiles, on what seems to be a bit of an off day for Jesus. Even many of the Bible commentaries make an appeal for Jesus' 100% human part, suggesting his 100% divine part was weary and needing rest. Whatever the case may be, this week Jesus flips the script on us. Instead of an opportunity to ask why, we're faced with a Jesus who is asking, why not? Listen now for wisdom and word. Then Jesus left Galilee and went north to the region of Tyre and Sidon. A Gentile woman who lived there came to him, pleading, "Have mercy on me, O Lord, Son of David, for my daughter is possessed by a demon that torments her severely." But Jesus gave her no reply, not even a word. Then his disciples urged him to send her away. "Tell her to go away," they said. "She's bothering us with all her begging." Then Jesus said to the woman, "I was sent only to help God's lost sheep, the people of Israel." But she came and worshipped him, pleading again, "Lord, help me." Jesus responded, "It isn't right to take food from the children and throw it to the dogs." She replied, "That's true, Lord, but even dogs are allowed to eat the scraps that fall beneath their master's table." "Dear woman," Jesus said to her, "your faith is great. Your request is granted." And her daughter was instantly healed. The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. This passage certainly presents us with a bundle of whys we might find ourselves asking. Why does the lectionary include 11 verses in parentheses? Why did the disciples want to see this woman turned away? Why does Jesus agree? That seems a bit out of character. Why does Jesus, the Christ, the very incarnate God, change his mind? Why does Jesus decide to heal the little girl? Why is the little girl not present in the story? Those whys each lead to their own sermon, and each of those sermons will eventually come back to a very different question. Why not? Jesus was supposed to come to redeem the nation of Israel, the Hebrew people, God's chosen. That is the word of the prophets. The verses the lectionary seems to indicate as optional recounts one of the stiffest rebukes of hypocrites in the gospel. Teaching is hard and tiring work, especially when your students are stubborn. That certainly doesn't provide an excuse for what happens next, but our humanity may recognize something familiar about the pressures that come with leadership. The New Living Translation says she is a Gentile, that is, not a Jew, the woman who approaches Jesus, pleading in desperation on her daughter's behalf. Matthew's Greek is written for a Jewish audience. He describes her for them as a Canaanite woman. A bit more information, telling us that she's not from the most desirable country. She's not just a non-Jew, she's an outsider. Mark, writing for a Roman audience, tells us she is a Syrophoenician, and thus someone who would have been culturally and aesthetically very different from them. With an air of "we're better than you," the disciples urge Jesus to send this annoying beggar woman away. And if we are to believe Matthew and Mark, Jesus is inclined to agree with them. The prime exemplar of generosity, the incarnate God, God's self, descended from on high for the expressed purpose of redeeming creation, tells this poor and desperate woman that he's come to save Israel, and that it wouldn't be right to take that redemption away from them and give it to her. Now, Jesus isn't quite as polite about it. He says, "It isn't right to take food from the children and throw it to the dogs." That's right, he called this woman a dog to her face. Don't get me wrong, I love dogs. I'm praying the next puppy into my life as we speak. But usually, when we are comparing people to them, it's not to be kind. He's a dog, the much less polite female version of that. "You ain't nothing but a hound dog. They lie like a dog." The list of insults goes on. She comes right back at him, though. She says, "Hey, you may not think of me as any more than a dog, but the master feeds even the dogs with scraps from the table." Friends, we think of table scraps as a treat for our furry, four-legged friends. But in the ancient Near East, they couldn't just pop down to the H-E-B and get some kibbles and bits. You saved your bones and maybe left a little on them. And the dogs got that, and whatever else they could find. The truth is the gospel did begin with those earliest Jewish communities. And if it hadn't had time to grow up there, who knows if it would have survived the oppression of imperialism for us to hear it today. But friends, the facts are plain. The first time Jesus sends the disciples out, in chapter 10, he tells them to go nowhere among the Gentiles. But by the end of Matthew's gospel, Jesus is sending them to make disciples of all nations. And by the end of Acts, they're going on mission to the ends of the known world. In these far-flung reaches of creation, they will encounter people who further challenge their expectations of people of faith. It will become necessary for them to expand and mitigate their expectations about the kind of person in whom faith might take root. Because we are all created to glorify our Creator. So we should come to expect to find all people, each and every kind of person we meet, to be capable of faith. Jesus recognizes something in this woman's confidence: hope. She is already convicted and convinced that this person upon whom she has never laid eyes, and whom she doesn't know from Adam, can offer her what she needs for her daughter to be healed. Paul already told us earlier in Romans, faith is hope in things not seen. And a Gentile, a lowly dog of a Canaanite, shouldn't even be able to see. Grace was for the chosen, remember? For the Hebrews, for Israel. And yet, here she stands, or rather kneels, a Canaanite woman, worshiping the Messiah of the Jews and begging for mercy. Mercy is a dimension of grace that is hidden from us by selfishness. The disciples, good, God-fearing Jewish men, are put out with this woman and would see her sent away, knowing that it probably means death for her demon-possessed daughter. And for a moment, Jesus is going right along with it all. Back in my first year or two of ministry, I was serving as an assistant choir director, and I attended a conference for music and worship leaders. One of the presenters was discussing ways we can engage creatively in worship with the hope that it would make the act of worship more accessible to more people. She proceeded to tell us about how she had visited a friend who was a gardener that kept an immaculately manicured landscaping around their home. However, the presenter noticed a flower that seemed oddly out of place, growing right in the middle of the garden path. Because the whole garden was so well manicured, she asked her friend about the lone flower growing in that particular spot. As it turns out, it was not a mistake of the gardener, rather a happy accident. See, the gardener also encourages songbirds and other pretty little flying things to join in the display with feeders placed around the property. One of these bird friends happened to make a deposit of these seeds from the feeder, and what happened next is just nature. The gardener saw no reason she should be the one to intervene, and so started to water that flower growing in the middle of the path along with all the others. And guess what? It grew. I was telling this story to some friends at seminary while we were discussing Mark's version of this miracle story one day over lunch. We concluded that there are some times when we draw a circle around our expectations and tend to them like a gardener, lovingly caring for them all and making sure we do everything we can to make sure that they turn out just like we think they should. Then a bird comes along and drops a seed outside the circle, and a sunflower grows. You can cut the sunflower down for growing in a spot you have decided is improper or wrong, or you can draw the circle of your garden a little wider, water that flower, and give it its best chance to thrive. Within just a few days, maybe a week, one of those friends from the lunch came back to me with a 4x6 glossy print of a color photograph in her hand. She told me about how the day after our conversation she had gone to visit her sister, and when she pulled into the driveway, she was astounded by what she saw. Right there, before her own eyes, just a foot or so outside the boundary of the flower bed, growing right up out of the gravel of the driveway, stood a 6-foot-tall sunflower. Also, for the record, expecting all the plants in your garden to come out genetically perfect specimens is vanity and folly. After all, why are we spending all that time tending to them? Colin Cowherd, ESPN commentator and sports radio personality, said something recently while talking about the challenges that face professional athletics in the era of coronavirus that I think is pertinent here. He said, if we are demanding growth from people, we can't simultaneously expect perfection. We can hear Paul recount this same message, only now in the decades after Jesus' death, it is the Gentiles of Rome that have put on the airs of we're better than you, not the Jews. He challenges them when they claim the prime spot in God's favor, asking them if they suppose that God has rejected his own people, the nation of Israel. Of course not, Paul goes on, reminding them that he himself is an Israelite and that they don't look down on him in this way. In fact, they look up to him. Paul is telling the Gentiles in Rome, it isn't all about them. No, God is calling every kind of person into the covenant of divine kinship, and Paul is about to remind them and us that we are the best examples of that fact. Hearing Paul say all this, I'm reminded of another story a friend told me recently about the old turtle. It goes like this. One night, in a faraway land that's somehow not so far away, a truth falls from the stars. As it falls, it breaks into 2 pieces. One piece blazes off through the sky, and the other falls straight to the ground. One day, a man stumbles upon the gravity-drawn truth and finds carved on it the words, "You are loved." It makes him feel good, so he keeps it and shares it with the people in his tribe. The thing sparkles and makes the people who have it feel warm and happy. It becomes their most prized possession, and they call it the truth. Those who have the truth grow afraid of those who don't have it, who are different, and those who don't have it covet it. Soon, people are fighting wars over the small truth, trying to capture it for themselves. A little girl who is troubled by the growing violence, greed, and destruction in her once peaceful world, goes on a journey through the mountains of imagining, the rivers of wondering why, and the forests of finding out, to speak with Old Turtle, the wise counselor. Old Turtle tells her that the truth is broken and missing a piece that shot off in the night sky so long ago. Together they searched for it, and when they find it, the little girl puts the jagged piece in her pocket and returns to her people. She tries to explain, but no one will listen or understand. Finally, a raven flies the broken truth up to the top of a tower where the other piece has been ensconced for safety, and the rejoined pieces shine their full message. You are loved, and so are they. And the people begin to comprehend, and the earth begins to heal. I think this is exactly what Paul is wanting us to remember, and what Jesus was trying to teach us all about when he witnessed and honored the faith of the Canaanite woman. We are not the sole arbiters when it comes to defining what it means to be a person of faith. Equipped with that knowledge, when we see others failing to be obedient or making mistakes, we would do well to realize first that we never have all the information nor any authority to judge anyone, and secondly, that we have received mercy once too. Furthermore, Paul always carries the lesson one step further. All these would-be mistakes folks make haven't just been keeping them out of heaven, they've been keeping us out too. Mistakes are made for mercy, Paul says, and we ought to be the ones to offer it. He writes, so they have now been disobedient, in order that, by the mercy shown to you, they too may now receive mercy. For God has imprisoned all in disobedience, so that God may be merciful to all. That's what growth is, Colin Cowherd says. It's making mistakes. It's the ability to make mistakes. Let that sit a moment. The sunflower grew in the wrong spot. It made what we might perceive to be a mistake. Cowherd says, too often now we want perfection and growth, and they can't coexist. So friends, we have a choice. We can chop that sunflower down, but it won't grow and have a chance to become its best self, the flower God intended it to be. It will be pretty in a vase for a couple of days, and then it will die, because that's all we hope for things that grow beyond the edges of our expectations. But friends, do you hear Paul and Jesus teaching us a better way? That flower may have come up in the wrong spot, and in your opinion, that may be a mistake or a flaw. But to God, it is a feature. You are loved, and so are they. Cutting down the flower would be a mistake of our own, and one all the more grave, because we choose to do it. If we add one more verse to Paul's reading this week, we find this. Oh, the depth of the riches and wisdom and knowledge of God. How unsearchable are God's judgments, and how inscrutable God's ways. Friends, we can't always figure out what God is doing. We can't always explain everything that Jesus said and did. But we don't have to. We just need to love God with all our heart and soul, and mind and strength, and love our neighbor, all our neighbors, any neighbors, like we love ourselves. So the next time you meet someone in church or in life, remember that you don't have to love them. You don't even have to like them. But it is a grave mistake to miss the opportunity to show them the love of Christ. They may leave you asking why. If you turn to Jesus and ask, he will say, why not? Friends, we all get burned. That's life. Knowing that, You have a choice. You can be the hot iron, or you can be the soothing aloe balm. You can chop down that sunflower, or you can thank God for the opportunity to make your garden bigger. Be a balm. Ooze mercy. Draw the circle wide and water the flowers that grow in the middle of the path. And when they ask why, say, why not? In the name that creates, redeems, and sustains. Amen. And may it be so.